Hey guys, what is up? Kaplan here. I am the head coach of Ghost Gaming Valorant and a content creator for all things Valorant. Today I'm introducing the first episode of my new podcast called No Cap. I feel like there needs to be a podcast that just gets extra deep and five-head with the analysis on the game and the pro scene in Valorant. So this podcast is going to be about breaking down the meta, looking at new agents and maps and buffs and nerfs, kind of talking really nitty gritty about the gameplay at a pro level, as well as kind of what goes on in a team environment, being a player, being a coach, and so on. I love getting deep and talking about this game for a long time, and I'm really excited that this gives me an excuse to bring really interesting people, really smart people on, and just have long, kind of deep conversation with them about this amazing game. I hope it's interesting to you guys. I hope it scratches an itch that wasn't get scratched. And without further ado, you're going to see who my first guest is, and we are going to jump into episode 1. Thank you for checking it out. Appreciate it. All right, what is up, guys? We are jumping into episode 1 here of the No Cap podcast, welcoming Coach Dream, the head coach of Cloud9 White, that is C9's women's team, and we're going to get into it. We're going to talk about a lot of different things today, but first, let's introduce you, Dream. You are a obviously Valorant coach. You were formerly a coach in Overwatch, I believe, for the Outlaws, and according to your Twitter bio, a film enthusiast. That is my extent of an introduction, and if you have anything to add, please do.
Sure. Well, happy to be here. Happy to talk shop, mess around, just kind of talk about the interesting stuff going on in the game right now with Astra coming out and stuff. But yeah, been in esports professionally for a while. Been following esports as a fan since 2005. So for a really long time, and then kind of late in life after I went to college and had real jobs and stuff, was like, you know what, let me actually try and do this. And I've just been really enjoying it. So yeah.
Nice. Awesome. Cool. Perfect. And I think we should just jump right in, and we'll do, we've got a few topics. We're going to bounce around. We're going to go with the flow here, but we'll go straight into our icebreaker, our very large icebreaker of Astra. It would be nonsense not to talk about this crazy agent. We're recording 2 days after her release, so very speculative. But I guess just initially, what do any initial impressions from you?
She's bananas is
Yeah.
is what I would say. Um, Both from a power level, at least again, it's early, so we don't know 100% for sure, but power level seems very, very strong. But the big thing to me is how sort of divergent she is design wise from what we think of for like tack shooters and CS, right? Um, Very clearly showing that Riot is willing to say like let's do some weird stuff. Let's
Totally.
really change things up, you know? And Yoru felt that way a little bit. Maybe if he had been like a good character, the fact that he can like do a bunch of fakes and deny info or give fake info, it seems like if that worked, that could be a thing that changes how we think about the game and how we play the game. He just kind of sucks, so it didn't work
Yeah.
out.
Yeah.
But with those two characters coming out back to back, I really think we're going to continue to see some crazy designs where I'm sure we'll get to this, where Astra, I feel like, defines your play style in your comp more than most other agents do, kind of forces you to play certain ways and play
Mm,
certain ways against her. And to me, that also makes me think that down the line, we might end up having a draft in this game,
yeah.
because they want to have characters that fit similar roles but still enforce very different play styles. And I don't know. That's just the initial feelings I get from Astra, is that they're willing to do wild stuff, and that I think we're building up to a stage where maybe in a year or two, depending on how quick the agent releases come, we might start having agent drafting in this game.
Yeah. No, I that's definitely a take I wholeheartedly agree with. I would love a draft to be very fun from a, coaching POV, and I do definitely agree she is by far the most kind of bold and creative and out of the box, out of the out of our normal dimension, I guess you should say, with her little astral world kind of take on the game. And it's interesting because you're definitely right. I mean, if you look at the progression of agents, you've got, granted, in the first initial agents that came out, there's still a spectrum. You have a character who shoots recons the wall hack, and then like Brim is as boring as it gets. Like you could use
Yeah.
just like you took a dude from Counter Strike, removed half his abilities, and we're like, here you go. Um, uh, but if you look at the progression, yeah, okay, you had a lady who throws birds that blind you and also tell her where you are, and her, even Sky's alt's design is a little adventurous. And yeah, totally, Yoru was definitely the most bold design since her, and I would say that Astra just it's clearly an exponential curve of wackiness because she's crazy. I think curious your thoughts, but it seems to me that Valorant, I think I don't know how intended the release of the game was. I think it might have been a perfect storm of timing and they just went for it. But I do remember very early on into kind of, late spring, early summer of 2020, the devs, such as like Morello, were kind of saying, we really want to get unconventional with the design, and we think like future agent design will be much more creative than I think he used Brimstone as an example of like this character is basic and not the template for the long run. And I do think Riot clearly, one thing this does say to me is Riot has a vision for the game, and they're not super afraid or concerned with what the pro scene or scenes that are moving into Valorant care. I think they value players' opinions, but clearly they have they're confident in their direction, right? Do you think it's kind of fair to say
Yes.
with Astra's
Yes.
design?
No. I agree with that very 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 much. And so my history, I whatever started out in like Halo way back in the day, but the professional history is all in Overwatch, right? And
Right.
Overwatch had a problem, and to me this is seems very clear from the outside. The devs haven't come out and said this, but it really very much feels that way. Is that they didn't have a vision of what
Yeah.
the gameplay of what Overwatch was supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
They wanted it to be as open to as many ideas as possible and as flexible as possible and have all these different crazy things going on. And there's a lot of things that I appreciate about that. And I think that they did design some really interesting, unique, and deep characters along the
But
way.
they also designed Brigitte.
Yeah, there's also been some pitfalls
Yeah.
along the way, and some things that have got us trapped at the pro level in some bad gameplay loops,
Mm-hmm.
where team fights do not work in fun or intuitive ways for the player or the viewer, right? So the difference with Valorant, with them, coming up with a character like this that feels like it really breaks the mold, is the core gameplay isn't going anywhere.
Yeah.
The core gameplay is the same. And
Mm-hmm.
it's creativity around that core gameplay without any of that changing. So when I first saw it, I was like, okay, this is not fucking CS anymore. We
Yeah.
are we
Yeah.
are not playing CS anymore. And I had that little nag in my head. I was like, are they just gonna let things go wild? And two agents down the line, I'm gonna start having these PTSD agents that come out
Yeah.
that just ruin the game, right? But I don't think that that's the case, because I look at it and it's like one of the big weaknesses that Astra has is a similar weakness that I think Sky has, which is taking your gun out after doing something takes forever. It is
Yeah.
so hard to be
Oh
like, I
yeah.
see a guy, I want to fluidly use an ability and then shoot something.
Yeah.
Like that is so hard to do. Where it's like Omen, for example, his blind has a little bit of a pull out animation, but you just rip the blind and swing.
Mm-hmm.
You're just vibing, right? Um, so I like that they are aware of those things and they give agents that seem like they have loaded kits on paper when we see the kits on paper, but we don't see the time of the animations and stuff like that. We're
Yeah.
like, oh, they're going to be insane. Then you start playing them. They're a little clunky. You have to figure out the right time, right place to use it. So to me, it feels like they do have a vision of, even when they want to do wild stuff, they don't want to take away from the core gameplay.
Yes.
And
Definitely.
that to me means whatever their vision is, even if it ends up being a vision that isn't that good or doesn't work, the game will still be a great game and will still be very functional, as opposed
Definitely.
to kind of where Overwatch has gone a little bit.
Yeah. No, that I definitely agree. Right. Overwatch. For those who don't know, when Overwatch was first being played competitively in beta, there wasn't even hero limits, right? You could
Yeah.
there was a pretty long meta where it was 2 Zen, 2 Tracer, and 2 Lucio. I mean, like I am not sure Riot was like, pumped and ready to release Valorant for a year before it released. I think for another day maybe, but I do think there's a chance that they just kind of went, oh, okay, we might have been planning to work on this game for another year, but this is like a really good time to release it. But still, they had a lot more figured out than that, right? And there's without getting too heavy on the Overwatch Valorant comparison, there's only one game mode, and it's a game mode pulled from a 20-year-old tried and true esport. So I definitely agree there, and I think that perhaps they were more reserved about agent design while figuring the game's balance at a core level out. But I do think, I can understand maybe the priority was getting that 5th map out or something and making sure it functioned in Icebox. And I do think there were issues that I think were major that are suddenly gone. In fact, I think, I'd love to get your thoughts, but, without fear of bouncing the conversation around, the Stinger meta, I thought it was crazy, and I thought it was really bad and messy. And I remember this last patch where they nerfed the Stinger. I went on an impatient Twitter rampage about like, I don't know if they nerfed it enough, and maybe the marshals. Why would you mess with that at all? And then everybody else was like Bucky, 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 and maybe a lot of people still are like Bucky, Bucky, Bucky. But I actually think they nerfed the Stinger, and the game's economy suddenly looks quite nice,
Way better.
and
Yes.
it's a really hard game to play, and it's weird compared to, its closest brethren, Counter-Strike. But I think people are getting more comfortable with Valorant and how it works. I think spectators, casters are getting more comfortable understanding it and talking about it. I think the economy's settling in. There's no new map around the corner. I think Riot is going to get a lot more confident and comfortable dropping agents like Astra and moving the meta around because they're not figuring out the basics of the game at the same time, right?
Yes, exactly. That core gameplay is very honed in on, and they do know what they want that to be like, right? Like anytime we're having issues with um like early on the animations were really herky jerky when you like stop to counter
Mm,
strafe, so it just looks, if there's any latency at all, it just looks like they're full running headshotting you, right?
yeah.
So they changed some stuff with the animations there. Um, obviously the run and gun meta, right? The Stinger meta that I agree was terrible. When you're buying Stinger light armor 4 rounds and a half, it's a fucking mess.
Yeah. Yeah, it
um,
is.
but they see those things and they're like, this is not what we want our core gameplay to be, our gameplay pattern to be.
Board, and
So
then
they address those things. So while obviously there are going to continue to be small hiccups and bumps in the road, and we just have to hope that those things don't line up with really important tournaments, right? Like I'm
mhm,
glad that Riot has gotten a handle on the Stinger meta prior to Masters coming up,
yeah.
or even prior to Challengers 3, right?
Mhm,
Because I really want to see the best teams in Masters. I want to see the best competition level at Masters. Um, and Riot historically in League of Legends is really good at that as well, at making sure they make heavy-handed balance changes in between when there's competitive play going. And as you get closer and closer to Worlds at the end of the year, they're lighter and lighter with the tweaks, because even if there's something wrong, it's better for it to be a little flawed, but everyone has practiced it a lot, than
yeah.
just throw everything into chaos right
Mhm,
before an event, right?
yeah,
So
absolutely.
yeah, I love that Riot does that, and it seems like it's harder to do that in Valorant because we are still on like that open circuit kind of format. But it seems like they're definitely keeping those kinds of things in mind with their balanced timetable, which is just
Totally. Yeah.
so great to see this early in a game, right?
Yeah, that they're being very, very conscientious about it. That's definitely true so far. Yeah, curious to see kind of where they go with patches in the next month, because this is kind of like the hot period before sort of the next round of challengers and masters. And kind of, there's definitely I would say a tight window between now and the next 2 to 4 weeks of any more changes kind of coming out. But we can get back to that. But I guess let's circle back to sort of Astra. Let's get like a closer in-game look at her. We're, two coaches who watch this game played every day pretty much. What do you think of, I guess we can go through her kit. I guess let's just kind of
Sure.
think about each ability. And I guess I would
I
start. I'm
mean,
trying to think of what order they are on the
first,
screen,
first
but
of all, her kit is cheap as fuck.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
That's a really big thing, is getting 2 stars for free
Hmm.
every round, and the stars are what, 200, right?
Yeah.
So if you wanna max out on utility every round, you use all your stars every
Which
round,
is a lot.
which is crazy.
A
Like,
lot of
you would have to
utility to
be,
have.
yeah, yeah, that's nuts. It only costs 600.
Yeah.
That's just Breach's flashes.
Hmm. Yeah. Totally.
Um, so I mean, Breach is like the most expensive agent, right? But for an agent to be this impactful and have this much utility and be able to fully load on it for only 600, that's wild, right?
Yeah.
Compared to like Omen's blind is 400, right?
Totally. Yeah.
That's
Yeah. It's a lot.
yeah.
Yeah. And it's
So
just one thing. And I mean, I think what stood out to me after watching her played a little and playing her a little is not only is it max 600 and you can accumulate them, right? If you, it's kind of, you want to use your stars, it's hard to not want to use them. But if you don't use it, if you recall it, you don't get it back at the end of the round. It's like a
yeah,
tripwire. But
yeah,
if you don't use it, you do accumulate more, right? If you have two and you don't use them and you end the round, you now have four. It doesn't care how many you have. It will always add two to the max of five. But something that stood out to me is 2 stars using, you can use 2 stars in tandem if you want, maybe sucking and stunning kind of
yeah.
on close to each other, like sort of a little Venn diagram. Like that's kind of the popular thing a lot of people are doing. The You can get a pick or take like, and you could just take hookah. Like you could just take a ton of space with it. And there are agents with very strong abilities for free. You've Arrow, you've got Recon, you've got the Breach Stun, you've got Raze Nade, Phoenix Molly.
Yeah.
Uh, my team runs Phoenix and Raze on a lot of maps. We, combine the utility a lot of the time. But this character, even if you spend just nothing, you don't even spend a dime on your round, you still have you can just make one big thing happen with just your abilities. Like you don't need to combine it with anything. You can just use 2 stars that you got for free and just like take space or get a free pick. And I do think that is something people will like notice the impact of a little more. That you could just be on a full save and just like, okay, but you want that one
Bang.
orb and showers or something, like there, that's it. Like you just grabbed it, stunned it, you got the orb, you got the room. I don't know what you do after that, but it's definitely powerful.
Yeah, I definitely think one of her big strengths from what I've been seeing is the like having the stars set for as soon as the spawn doors go down, right? And you do that grab stun, and you can just totally take an extremity. And
Yeah.
there is almost nothing you can do to deny that, right? So like on split on T side, for example, if I want to take garage, I'm just sucking and stunning on your peak, and you are just absolutely fucked.
Yeah.
Or if you're worried about like an op peak, right? What you can do is set the suck so that the edge of it will start pulling them as they get close to the angle, and they have no accuracy, and they literally just can't
Hmm.
hold the angle with an op.
Yeah.
It's
Absolutely.
it's just absolutely useless. So that stuff is really crazy. Another thing you can do that's really strong for like defaulting is obviously being able to pick up her stars gives you like that 1 second smoke,
Yeah.
right? So using that early to on split again, but on A to smoke off that screen's peak and cross like you would with the cipher cage. It's just a cipher cage, except you don't invest anything. It's
Yeah.
just free.
Yeah. No, that's
Which is
very true.
wild. Um, but you can do that same thing on an early peak as well. Like a really good example is instead on CT in Garage, you put that smoke down where they're usually going to peak. A lot of Omens will smoke that right now when they're on CT side, they're holding Garage, right?
Hmm.
You put that smoke so you can cross in. Well, you just put the star there, go to recall it, and they don't know if someone has just walk across in that time. And now they have to clear all of Garage. And all you did was put a star and recall it as soon as the round started.
Yep. Yep.
They have to invest utility just to find out if someone's in there.
Yeah.
It's
And
crazy.
you don't you do lose that star for the next round if you ended up holding on to it by the end of that round. But within the vacuum of that one round, you basically, the only thing you invested is having one of your 5 stars down for the first 8 seconds, which is so irrelevant that it doesn't even, you basically
And and
invested nothing. Yeah.
and if you just like die or something, or for some reason you don't use any more stars in the round, which would be really weird, you still just get a free
Yeah.
star.
Yeah.
You
No,
just get to
it
give them back to
definitely.
yourself.
Yeah. One thing
So
you
yeah.
can do with that recall thing too is you can actually just pump. It's really situational, but you could just pump 5 stars in one spot and just chain recall them, and you have a 10-second smoke at the start of the round too. So it doesn't
Well,
even just have to be like a quick little cross. You could just keep cycling it.
I saw somebody on Ascent do this thing where they were on CT side, they started in mid, and they had a trail of stars going through mid and up cat,
That's
and they just popped them to recall them as they ran up cat
that's a good
and
one.
pushed A main at the same time. And I was like, oh my
That's that's a
god.
classic from the Brim era where you just drop the tunnel of the 3 smokes and you run through it. And on my first team in this game, Code 7, I think is where I got this term. We called it we did it in a scrim, and somebody on the other team, my Brim did it in 1v1, and the other team said like, oh, they just typed Alaskan bullworm, which is the big like caterpillar thing from SpongeBob. It's just this hairy brown caterpillar going through. So you can do even longer bullworms with her. That's true. And
Yeah,
on the note of humorous topics, is okay. We've got the gravity well. Is it
mhm.
the suck? Is it the grav? Is it the well? Is it one player on my team is fighting for it to be called the cyclone? This is
It's
a
the
hot
suck.
debate. It's the suck. Okay.
It's the suck with, but it's spelled with 2 C's.
Yeah. There you go. All right.
SUCC.
All
The
right.
suck. Okay. That's an Overwatch classic. For sure. Arisa Pole being the thing that people call suck the most in that game. But
Yeah.
that to me, I immediately just want to call it the suck. I feel like that's just the most intuitive. Everyone knows what the hell you're talking about, and it's a little fun too. So why
Yeah.
not?
That's fair. I first I was like, it should be called the well. It's the gravity well. And then my chain of process or my thought process was none of my players read. I don't know if it's because I played Magic the Gathering as a kid or something that I actually read the name of the ability, but I have met very few professional Valorant players who do. So I can't call it the well because they're just going to be like, what are you talking about? It's not a well. It's not made of rocks and it's not pulling out
It's a black
water.
hole.
And then so I was like, calling it wormhole before we knew the ability names, and I was like, that's not really it. And then I was like, let's just call it grav because I'm not a big Overwatch player and I never really played in the Orisa even by the time Orisa came out. But I was like, okay, well, it's like graviton surge. Let's call it grav. And then one player in scrims yesterday is just going, it just sounds ugly, like grav. It's just like so low and boring. And then he was like, we should call it cyclone. I was like, nope, we're not doing 2 syllables. Cyclone, that's cluttering comms. And
Yep.
then the journey right now, I have accepted defeat, except for the fact that my final compromise is it is suck, not sucky suck. And my teammates my players are I'm pretty sure unironically in the middle of scrims going, can you sucky suck here? I need sucky suck showers. And I'm like, just you could suck showers, but you cannot sucky suck. It's it's gonna be it's twice the comms. It's twice suck for a sucky suck, twice the comms. Not a professional. Somebody's not gonna hear somebody tap the defuse or something.
I can't wait for listen-ins in this game.
Yeah.
And all the content that's gonna come out from orgs with like their player comms once Astra's in these tournaments and they're like, suck him down.
Yeah.
Pulling people off of stuff.
I wasn't too sure if everyone's gonna call it suck, but clearly it's the case from what I'm hearing from you. I watched a little of Sick's stream last night. He was calling it suck. Whether Riot I think they just have to accept it. Either that or pay casters some extra bucks to make sure they call it the gravity well in pro games.
That's the thing. That's at least the thing in League of Legends is like most of the play-by-play casters have to have like encyclopedic knowledge of like the names of all the abilities and the characters' passives.
Yeah.
And they have to use all the right terminology. So I'm sure that will be the standard for the casting, but at least for like the fun content and stuff, everyone's gonna call it the suck.
Yeah.
Or in those like hype moments when they get caught up in it, they're just gonna yell suck instead.
Yeah. No, and I think they should embrace that. It's what if it's what the players call it. It's what's familiar. I don't even know what Sky's. She has a dog. I don't know. I don't know its name.
Trailblazer.
Okay, if the caster said that, I would have to
a Trailblazer.
Yeah.
Bro. If you call it like wolf or something,
yeah,
not dog, but something similar,
fine.
like whatever, I don't care. If
call
you
it drone.
said like if you're like between rounds, you're like they really need to use their Trailblazer to get more information. I have no idea what you're saying. I've got nothing.
That's true.
Yeah. So But I mean, I think in general, I don't know. Maybe they might have overcomplicated things with like blind and flashed and nearsighted and leer and all.
Hmm.
That might be a little weird. People just say they're blinded or flashed. It's kind of just too much to worry about mentally. But I feel like ability names, people are just gonna call it what they want to call it,
Yeah.
man. There's not really anything. You can make it as simple as you want. People are just gonna call it what they want to
Yeah,
call.
that's very true. No matter what, that's definitely a good point. Yeah. And I guess, getting back to what do you think other than like it's hard with Astra. I was gonna say, what do you think is her strongest ability? But like the way her kit works has a lot of there's a lot of ability and implications like within the stars and the recalling of them. But I guess to me the suck is it. I watched her for one day of scrims. I was like, is she that good? I like maybe not. I don't know. And then like kind of played some ranked, watched some ranked, watched her scrims. I was like, this ability is so good that I actually think her whole kit's good for the most part. But to me, that ability is the reason I feel everything with a grain of salt. But we're 2 days in, but I think she's gonna be meta, and I think that ability is enough reason to. It was kind of the deal breaker for me. It seems to be so strong in its implications of comboing with other abilities, pulling people out of angles, claiming map control or orb control really early, that like just respecting that a star lands and could be that, you know, I think like and the ceiling of it, it's kind of the floor and ceiling are pretty high to the
Yes.
suck's impact in my opinion, and I don't think it's comparable to any other ability. Like I think the closest things are like breach stun, I guess, or sage slow, but I don't think they really come close personally. But yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think other abilities that you want to use, like I said, and I think we're on the same page, a really big strength of hers is having those stars down in the pre-round and just popping them for immediate early control of some area
Hmm.
of the map, and then just making you have to really invest to take that stuff back. Like you think about a breach stun, and even if you want a breach stun off rip, that you have to like charge it up for a second. A lot of times you're not going to be able to be looking at the angle
Yeah.
that you want to peek with the stun, right? You're not going to have your gun out right away. Like with her, you can have it set up, you can pop it and double swing with one other person. And
Totally.
you have one other person with you, and you have the utility and two guns looking at the spot. So it is
Hmm.
very, very strong. And again, the fact that it makes you inaccurate means that, like, for example, if I use other utility, if I'm opping, like if I'm a jet op and you use other utility on a jet op angle, like a shock dart or a breach stun or something, the jet can just sit there, like tank the shock dart damage or tank the stun because you can still take one op shot and dash away, right?
True. Yeah.
Like there's a lot of utility where if they want to play more aggressively, they can kind of fight in the utility and
Hmm.
just dash out. You cannot do that at all with the suck. That is not a
Yeah.
possibility because you are totally inaccurate. Um, so you just have to totally abandon the angle.
Yeah.
And the fact that she can just place that from anywhere and just instantly ruin an angle
Hmm.
is insane. There's not really anyone else that has that ability, right?
Yeah. No, and I tried testing it. I think you're definitely way less accurate if you move while it's moving you than if you
Yeah.
just let it move you. But it didn't feel to me as if I was standing still levels of accurate while it was sliding me. It felt like I was
It's like
walking
walking
speed
accurate.
but I might be
Yeah.
wrong. I don't actually know. It's the one thing you can do is just tank it and sit in the middle of it and post on the angle and be like, well, I basically have to be standing in this spot. They know that. They
Literally
could
in the middle
pre-aim
of it. Yeah.
that. And also I'm vulnerable. And then, my final issue with this is that you are fragile and have to respect that another piece of utility could just come end your life, including, by the way, a shock dart, because you are
Yep.
vulnerable. You will actually get one shot by a shock, and that's such a big gamble to take. Like that, if your counterplay option to keep the angle is that risky, it's not like a it's not
It's
like
not a
an
good gamble.
engaging 50-50 that balances the ability out severely. It's like, yeah, you could try to play around it, but it's utterly terrifying and probably not worth it. And by the way, if you don't hit the first headshot, if they have a rifle, Phantom's going to two-hit you in the stomach because you're fragile. So,
Yeah.
yeah, no, I definitely think that ability is amazing. I think the way it contests for a key piece of map or orb at round start is my first impressions are that you the A long fight on Haven, right, with the defenders trying to grab that orb and the attackers trying to come out of A main and contest down A long. That is like an integral fight to Haven. If you watch any pro game, it's just back and forth. That's such a big fight that happens so many rounds, and it's this deep exchange of utility in players. It's we're gonna dart and cage and flash out of the cage, and you're gonna dart and shock and try to counter flash or throw the Lyra up while you grab the orb, or and then you're shooting each other. Players are falling, like you're investing utility. Players, it's granted it's 2 days in. I think people will get better at playing around it, but the succ, you put it on the orb as the attacker and you suck, and it's like that's the first 2 seconds of that fight are just like I can't, unless they're like trading maybe like a breach stun on the main or like their own suck on the main. You're just like, you could retake that space, but you lose the initial contest. Like the suck just said, this is like, nope, 3 seconds, you can't come in for 3 seconds. And to me, the value that gets is just massive. I mean, I think especially with orbs, I think like her stars just bully and contest and deny orbs at round start better than anything we've seen yet. And I think orbs are going to be a bigger and bigger part of the game as teams get closer to each other. It's going to be more about who has the big ultimate abilities in that round. And I mean, when you have an agent that's just like way ahead of the rest of the agent pool at contesting orbs, I think it's going to hurt. And it would be too painful to not run her is my thoughts. So,
Well, I mean, that's one of the things where NA not running as much breach as some other regions, like that's one of the things that we missed out on, is because breach's stun is so good at stuff like that, right? Like in that exact scenario, if you're the CT, you have the breach playing at like A link, A connector, and he just stuns the T side, like spawn, walk into lobby every time, and then they're not going to get there in time to contest the orb like 9 times out of 10, right? Unless they're like doing some fucking jet dash or some nonsense to try and dodge a breach stun, right? But this means that we can play, like you get that benefit, which in my opinion is breach's biggest benefit, is his consistent map control and pressure, right? I can stun off rip, and then if you contest the area, I'm just gonna flash and we're gonna repeat it, right? So you can get that early round map control. I think is like really weird and non-intuitive, especially some of the elevation differences. Have you noticed that? Like how breach ult interacts differently, where if you're higher or lower than the target you're breach ulting?
I haven't really, no.
Yeah. So for example, if you are below the breach ult, it will knock them up higher and they can surf way higher. So like on Ascent, if you're in like hell and they're retaking through heaven, right? And you ult them, they can like jump and like surf really high. Whereas if you're above them and you ult, they just get glued to the ground. They can't.
That is strange.
And they can't surf, right?
Wow.
So there's like really weird stuff like that. The hitbox is really weird. I'm not a huge fan of breach ult. I feel like it is one of the least reliable ults that you can have. And whatever, we could talk about breach utility not being utilized super well, but basically the biggest advantage that you get from running breach, you now just get in your smoker like all the time. And it's like, that's crazy. I'm interested to see if her plus breach means you can just take the whole map. We'll see how that plays out. But really, what I'm interested in is playing her with those utility heavy duelists like the Phoenix Rays combination, right? The duelists that also have good free utility, right? Which was also so annoying in the Stinger and Frenzy meta, where you could buy Frenzy armor in round 1 and run around with Phoenix Rays and have free util that's absolutely broken.
Yep, totally.
So But I think that and having that free with the free smokes means you have a lot of free map control with that comp with Astra, right?
Hmm.
But also how good and impactful all of those ults are. And I mean, obviously Phoenix ult is really cheap, but we'll get to Astra ult later. But that is a very impactful ultimate that I think you can make a lot of plays around. So yeah, I think that playing very proactively and playing very heavy for map control, kind of how Bind is played by some teams for showers, where both teams on T and CT side just every round just fight showers. They're
Yeah.
just like, fuck it, we want showers.
Hmm.
Um, I think we're gonna. I think Astra will force that playstyle more on more maps, where you are just forced to say, "I'm gonna lay claim to an area of the map and fight it early."
Hmm.
Because if I don't do that, the enemy Astra will take half the map away from me in the first 20 seconds of the round.
Yes. Yeah. Totally. I think that definitely that she definitely encourages that play. Yeah. It's sort of sieging and contesting map back and forth with utility. And it's interesting to me because if you look at her kit, I actually think it's great at map control, right? You can like drop these stars to stun and suck A and B main on a certain map, or kind of, whatever, hookah and showers, these kind of key pieces of map. I think it's going to be interesting to see how the game plays when you both Astras trying to match each other with that. It's just going to be
Yes.
back and forth. And then when you look at her kit, it looks amazing for 5-man executes, in my opinion, too. You can pretty immediately click, 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 and these stars are almost going to appear at the same time. And then they're pretty much going to smoke. Two smokes, a stun and a sucker going to go off almost at the same time. And that, that's very poppy. You can also siege a site, so you can pop or kind of do the more like siege execute, where you're like nading this and sucking this and like just trying to like clear out the site before going in and committing. But people also need to understand, when you look at Astra, what's she insane at? Well, she's insane at it on both sides. Yeah, so she could, you could just take the space with the suck. Well, the other Astra could just throw it back. And in terms of executes, a lot of people were like, she's gonna be insane at executes. I remember Sabrosa had a video. Look, you could just, whatever. You could suck back plat on Haven C and stun behind default, and that's like the whole site. Like, but you also have a character who, granted they're visible, but otherwise basically has cages in front of these chokes all over the map and is playing somewhere, and then whoever's anchoring on the site just says, press this, like turn this into a suck. And it's the same thing. You could drop all the Astra stuff and pop, but one star in front of the, C choke on Haven, the defending Astra just sucks, and
You're fucked.
You're fucked because you just dumped all this utility, and now you can't go out, and 3 seconds later you can go out and all your stuff's gone. You're dry out of util, so either your post plant's going to suck because you've no utility left to play it, or they're still in the site or they came back in, right? And it reminds me of, I forgive me for not knowing kind of, did you jump into Valorant right away, or like at what time kind of did you switch over to coaching this game?
I was following the game really heavily ever since the beta, but I didn't start working in the game until October, either late
Gotcha.
September or early October.
Yeah. So I'm sure if you were following and watching, you're aware, but for, anyone listening who might not be following the game and kind of, before I would say mid-June, Sage was extremely meta, picked by everybody all the time, and Cypher cages just slowed really bad.
Yes.
So if you tried to go through a cage, the first part of the cage you'd enter, it would make a noise, and it would take you a year to get to the other end of the cage. And even then, you're like coming out like covered in, just so slow. It was like Cyphers were just playing on sites and acing everybody. And the way it made the game play was that it was much more about baiting and exchanging utility. And I think rounds played, we've seen a meta for a while now where if you run Breach or Omen or Jet or whatever, you can do these pops, right? You could just mix and match doing a default, and just, you see pro teams we're just going to go 5A this round. Like, it doesn't even have to do with an ult. Like, we have guns, they have guns. We're just going to go pop this side and ascent. Let's go. If you tried doing that for the first 3 months of this game, you were just throwing the round away. You didn't have a choice but to default, because if you tried to hit any site with, and you'd play the Sage and Cypher opposite, if you tried to hit those sites, one slow or one cage, and your whole execute is stalled out, and the whole defending team can rotate. And I think that kind of the one, it was much more about exchanging of utility and playing slow because of that. And I think
Yep.
this playing slow part isn't so true on Split, but I do think, at least if you look at NA, there seems to be a gentleman's agreement to play Split like EU does with every map with this breach. And at least the exchanging and trading of utility part, you see it on Split, right? There's much slower default rounds on attack, and it's much more trying to exchange flashes so that you can end the round and there's not all that utility left. I think it's just a guess, a big guess for 2 days in, but I think I think Astra will be meta and both teams will run her in most matches, and I think she will make the game play like that. It will be an exchange of Astra utility, and I do feel as though if you just slam a site, the threat of her abilities stalling and stopping your execute and her strength on retake are going to de-incentivize just round start on attack going, let's hit A.
I mean, if she has ult up, you better be terrified of that retake. That's
totally
gotta be the best retake ult in the game.
Mm-hmm.
Unbelievable. But I mean, I absolutely agree as far as forcing the trades, and I don't know, she really reminds me a lot of a Sentinel on CT side, because you have this very high impact stopping power utility that has to be set up ahead of time, and you can just trigger.
Mm-hmm.
So you can be an Astra and have stars on Split, for example, on both sites. You can be playing like top ramp or something. You can have a star for yourself. You can have a star in mid, and you can have a star in B main, and just be ready to pop any of them whenever anyone tells you. And that's crazy to me, right? I will say, like, I mean, there's a very slight thing with her smokes where they're like not as tall as other smokes, so in very specific situations they aren't quite as good. But realistically, they're just as good as Omen smokes, right? It's only like if you're on Haven C and someone's opping on top of the box, like they can see you like over the smoke sometimes, like weird situations like that. But I mean, her abilities are like, her smokes are just as good as other smokes, right? It's not like brim length, but whatever. And then her other stuff is literally like the suck and the stun will just kill you. Like you will just die. People can throw util without having to see it, like just bank a nade, bank a shock dart, whatever, and kill you, or just peek. And you have such a hard time fighting back against either of those things. I do agree. It does feel like it will be a lot like the Sage, where you have to, we have to bait out the first slow. Okay, we have to get them to wall. All right, well, it's not beta, so we can actually wait out the wall. We don't have to just like knife it to death and have that take 20 seconds. But yeah, it does seem like it'll be very much a methodical map control, build up a bunch of small advantages over the course of the round. um you know Deny info in the mid round, break ankles. Like, it feels like that is really where she's going to push the play. I really think that I think it's weird that her stars are so impactful but can't be broken at all. um I don't know how to balance that, because if you can just like, if I want to put 2 stars for like a suck stun and you can like shock dart and break that, that's pretty brutal. So I don't know how to balance it, but the fact that if I see those stars, like, there's nothing I'm just like, I just have to be afraid now. Like, what do I do? Like, it's just so oppressive. Like,
It is. If you, I think, especially playing against an Astra on defense on attack, you're definitely, if you see a star on a certain choke point, there's not, you can't, like, it's basically, I just, you either walk past it, like, and like make a contact play and sneak past it, and that's like how you're hitting the site, or you're like working picks somewhere, like, but you see that star in the front of that choke, you visibly see it, and you just go, we cannot just execute or pop this site. Like, that's just the reality. Like, it's not like you can go around it. There's choke points in this game that are pretty small to enter the bomb sites and there's spike
Yeah.
sites, and you cannot do anything about it except to bait it. But it feels harder to my concern is that it felt easier to bait Cypher and Sage utility because they were playing those sites and
Yeah.
they wanted to stall you out instead of taking a dry fight or something. But I don't have great examples for this idea yet, but I do think it's more a big concern for me is it's going to be difficult to bait out Astra stuff because she doesn't need to use the stars to hold her site. They're not even her sites. There's other people comfortably. You can have a Phoenix jiggling who feels kind of comfortable with jiggling because they can flash. You can have a camera looking at the stars. So it's just hard to, you know, I think it's harder to bait it out because Astra's not the one that has to play the site. And I think kind of to just jump to my largest concern with her, if they do, let's say you don't let the other team bait out your star, you're like, I really don't want to use this. I really don't want to use this. Like the fear with Sage playing a site is I really want to slow to kind of stop them from poking my site, but I really want to get it at the right time. But what if I'm too greedy and they end up popping out and then I'm like, shoot, I should have slowed. Now this is a waste. That doesn't even really matter with Astra because if you kind of don't use her star and they try to bait it and you don't use it and then they end up getting in the site without using it, you just pick it back up and have it for retake, and it's an amazing retake tool. And day one of kind of watching her play, I was like, okay, wait, everyone can see the star. Is like, is the suck or stun really gonna get that much value? Because people like kind of can play around it once they see it land near them. But there's a couple different things about that. Number one, even if you put a star next to somebody who's in like a cubby and they see it coming, they still have to dry swing or use utility, like which is great. You either force somebody into your teammate's crosshair or their op or something, or you made them use utility to have to get out so they can't get sucked. And I'm like, okay, that's cool, right? So like there's a utility trade. No, wait a minute, you just pick it up. And so it gets to a point where first part of my thought, people will play around this because they see the star. Second part, wait, that's amazing for Astra because you don't even invest your ability. You just put a star somewhere. And I saw, it's happening in ranked games. People play hookah and you see 2 stars land. If you don't leave, you are trolling. You are going to die and lose hookah now. Like you could push out, I guess. You could attack them or you can jump out. So, okay, there's some counterplay. Then the Astra just drops 2 stars. You're trolling if you don't push or jump out. But so like as the person who's experiencing the stars landing on you, you really don't have a choice because we go back to that risk is so huge if you just sit in them. But for the Astra, because they know you don't have a choice, you could just, you pick them back up and then you basically just, you baited their utility or force them out of positions without actually investing anything. And I do, for me, I would love to hear your thoughts, but that is my biggest concern with her long run is a lot of her weaknesses are actually strengths because you could see the stars, but that's actually really good for her. I think the fact that you could just recall these things and use them so quickly after, it's really concerning to me because it's not great reactive utility, but even if your proactive plans don't pay off, I remember in the dev interview, they were like, this agent, we want to reward good reads and smart players. And I was like, oh, okay, that's the coolest thing ever. You just made like a nerdy IGL agent, but you don't, if your read is wrong, you get rewarded anyway, basically, which is definitely my biggest issue with her.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree. She seems too efficient at trading utility and getting those small mid-round advantages that pile up to a big late-round advantage, right?
Yeah, totally.
Especially again considering how cheap her kit is.
Yeah.
She can do all this, get free value, and even when she doesn't get free value and she has to use abilities, you're okay with it because the abilities are so cheap.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's definitely a lot there. I also think a big part is the unlimited range to activate and pick them up.
Yeah.
I don't like that. I think if I want to put a star down across the map and you're like, I don't know if the Astra's here or not, but I can see the star. I don't need to be able to tell that the Astra is out of range like I can with Killjoy. Just don't let her use and pick them up until she's somewhat close,
Yeah.
right? Um, because then I'm like, if I get any info on where Astra actually might be, then I can hit the other site even if the stars are there. I don't give a fuck.
Yeah.
Or if I see her putting stars down for the retake, I have, that it is useful information as opposed to Astra could be on the other site and she's just throwing her util for a fast retake because
Yeah.
they have three here, even though she's not one of those three. Doesn't
Yeah.
matter. She's just gonna drop all of her stars and they just run through a smoke and insta fast retake, right?
Yeah. Totally.
Um, so I definitely think that adding some like let her put them down at whatever range. I don't care about that, but give her like it doesn't have to be the same as Killjoy where it's like footstep range or whatever. It can be a little
Mm-hmm.
further. I don't care. But I feel like there should be some limit to that because
Yeah.
her ability to just constantly pick things up and put things down, activate them all across the map, like you were saying, when it's not her that has to worry about the angle, like you can play someone with flashes or like Omen Blind or Rain or
Mm-hmm.
whatever, where as soon as I'm jiggling, I'm getting info or I'm just posted on an angle, and as soon as I get info that we need to pop the star, we can just pop the star and I can use my own utility to keep myself alive. Where if Astra had to do that, she's at risk. She
Right.
can't have her cake and eat it too, right?
Mm-hmm. Totally. And I think for every agent in the game, even if you're investing in faking, with the free ability you're gonna have back, there's what you are investing by faking is um losing out on a window of time where you can do certain things that require that ability because it's now down,
Sure.
right? A recon omen smokes. It's the obvious one. Okay, if you omen smoke to fake and pull rotates or bait utility, yes, you can do that, but the curve and kind of the growth of teams are that they understand, okay, you faked, but now I know you don't have smokes for 35 seconds or whatever, or
Yeah.
there's your recon, and if you do want to do something in the next 35 seconds, it's going to be weaker, and there's kind of a back and forth there, and it seems strange to me that I think the recalling of her stars in and of itself is crazy, but the fact that I actually might be wrong, this is a guess of a number, but I'm pretty sure you can use it within, I think it's like I'm guessing 8-ish seconds after you recall it. That is crazy to me because it's not even like, oh, well, at least you can't use that star for 20, 30 seconds. And you see a star or a fake execute and you kind of weigh, it would be kind of punishing for her to not have these stars later. So maybe this is committed because like if she just puts these all down and pulls them back, she won't have stars for 30 seconds. But right now it's like 8 seconds. So an Astra can just, and I think if they don't change it, it will get to a place where the APM of this agent in a pro setting will be ridiculous because because you would get some value out of her star just landing somewhere, even if it recalls within 2 seconds, you will just have busy Astras on slow rounds just dropping and recalling stars all over because there's not a good reason not to. Like even if it's a small chance that it actually has any impact because you just landed a star and then 2 seconds later you picked it up, there's a chance somebody was there and ran or used utility because they were scared of getting sucked. And you only lost it for 8 seconds and you have 5 of them. You can always hold on to 2 and just start chucking 3 around everywhere. It's definitely, for me, I think you said it, that, her kit's really cheap. Early to say, but I think it's probably the best kit an agent at trading utility. I think it's the most efficient at trading. I think it beats every other agent in trading utility except herself. And then finally, for me, I do think her kit is so defensively powerful that it slows the game down a lot, which when you slow Valorant down, it emphasizes trading utility as one of the most important elements of winning a round. And so she makes the gameplay at a pace which rewards her kit as the best at that pace. And I really think she only competes with herself in trading utility, obviously. And kind of the culmination of all those things for me is enough to yeah, it's 2 days in, but I think she's pretty, my money's on meta,
Yeah.
a meta
Yeah.
pick.
I mean, and I definitely feel that pre Astra, right, the way the meta has been outside of, right, the Stinger Frenzy shit where that just kind of forced you to have certain buy patterns, and like we talked about, that encouraged playing characters that have good free utility because they get so much value on those Stinger half armor like force buy rounds, right? But once we kind of got out of that mode, it really has felt like you can make almost any composition work
Mm-hmm.
if you want to, and you just play to your strengths, right?
Yeah.
You can do the vision strikers. We want to get as much value out of these flashes as possible and take as much space as possible in like these flash windows. You can do stuff like that. Um, you can play sort of the double utility duelist, Phoenix Rays style, where you have map control, you have really powerful ults to cycle. You can
Mm-hmm.
play to kind of take brawls. You can play the Jet Reyna 50-50 fucking
Yeah.
coin flip comp.
Yeah.
Um, you could play Sage comps. You could play No Sentinel. You could play, no duelist and run it down mid with a Sova doing your vision strikers like
Mm-hmm.
NIP does, right? There's just a million different looks right now, and I really like that about
Yeah.
the game and how it's been. Um, but this feels like an agent that is so strong that that will not be the case.
Yeah.
Um, this reminds me of pre-nerf Sage in the sense of it's or like pre op nerf Jet Op, where it's like you just kind of have to do this even if
Mm-hmm.
it's not your strength, because people who are not as good as you will beat you because of how strong this play style is.
Yes. Yeah.
It
Definitely.
really seems that way. And obviously, teams will get smarter at dealing with it and will come up with like counter plays in certain areas. But again, just the far reach of her abilities around the map, and then how the only real way to punish her is to make her need to use her abilities like quickly, right? That's what she's
Mm-hmm.
bad at. But the problem is she can have everything pre-set up and there's no penalty for just picking up the one she doesn't
Yeah.
need.
Yeah.
So
Totally.
it's very easy to play her in a way where that weakness of, okay, switching into my astral form, throwing down the star, popping the star and swinging,
Mm-hmm.
I could die 5 times in that amount of time. You know what I mean? Like, I'm just gonna die if I try. Well, it doesn't matter. I can just have 3 stars set up in this area and then 2 stars on this other part of the map. And 20 seconds into the round, I've popped a couple of them and I've recalled the others, and I'm ready for our mid round
Yeah.
decision making. Right?
Yeah. Absolutely. No, I definitely think you're very right that the meta was in a flexible place with, I think you really could play the comps that rewarded your team and your players and the style you wanted to play at. And I definitely understand the fear and, in my opinion, likelihood that she is powerful enough that you have, not only do you have to run her, you had to run Omen, but there were a lot of different styles within having to run
Yes,
Omen.
exactly. She is very specific in the play style that she works in, and she's really strong.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes. And so she's really, I definitely agree with the concern and the likelihood. I would bet on her setting the pace and making the meta more narrow, I think.
Yeah.
I will say to me, one pro of that is I felt the meta was in a place that was a little more. I felt like this is, an IGL, and I've seen other IGLs say it on things like Immortal Minds, that they felt like the game was in a place where there was a lot of guesswork. Like, aggression and pops were so powerful that sometimes slow defaulting would just lose to teams aggressively coin flipping in certain areas and then kind of like retaking the other area. And like, it just felt. I definitely think that if she forces this meta, it will be a meta of more strategic depth, like within that meta, like maybe less options, but it is a very strategic meta. If an Astra meta happens, I think it's fair to say. And I do think when the game slows down like this, it has happened before. I do think it can make the game feel less gambly and make it feel like the smarter team wins more, in my opinion. But so I think that might happen, and to me, that's a pro of this. but long term, still a con that you lose kind of flexibility in like the identity of how you want to play as a team. I think if that does
Yeah, we
happen.
lose that meta diversity in some teams uh that are have other strengths other than like because yeah, we talk about like just popping sites like
Hmm.
being kind of coin flippy or what was it like I don't remember if it was Immortals, but some team went like A on Icebox 12 rounds in a row or
Yeah.
some nonsense like that, right? Like obviously that's like an extreme case. Um but I mean, in my opinion, if you're winning it's working, so who cares, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, I like the strategic, like nerdy shit as a coach, but
Yeah.
I
Same.
try to like embrace the other stuff if that's what works, if that's what feels good, we're just gonna do it. But I do think that on a macro level, it definitely will reward strategy, but it feels like in a lot of the scenarios, I'm just imagining like I take this important map control but then my entry or my like swinging into a site or clearing an angle like there's still going to be a large amount of those 50-50s happening because
Yeah.
what happens in these slow rounds you get into the late rounds and there's not a lot of utility left.
Left. Right.
People trade all the utility,
Hmm.
there's very
That's a
little
good
left
point.
and then it just comes into raw gunfights.
Yeah.
And I don't have a problem with raw gunfights being the decider, but with how much people, the community at large, has recently been complaining about contact plays and people just taking duels and that dictating who wins
Hmm.
the round, there's going to be a lot of, you know, 50 seconds into the round, right? 40 seconds left in the round. There's going to be a duel, and that will literally determine the round.
That's true.
Um,
Yeah.
and I think those things will happen a lot. And again, whatever. I mean, that's just where the game's going to be. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. You just have to be aware of that. And I'm sure some people will find a way to complain about that. As no matter what meta we end up in, there will be some people that are like, I liked playing the other way. This is bad. So
Hmm. That's a good point. Yeah. No, I think in the ideal world, the thing I daydream about as I fall asleep, it's like, this will be this beautiful strategic utility exchange, slow game, slow meta, and it'll be whatever team's more efficient about their utility and utility trades and manages their alt economy better will come out on top at the end of this round where you've traded all this utility. And I do think there will be plenty of rounds where that happens. But I think the harsh reality is you're right. If we're accurate of what we're saying about Astra, I think there will be more rounds where, yeah, recently it's been this kind of these big team fights of like retake, execute, like big utility. I think if it slows down, it's more about exchange of utility. By the time you get to late round, it will be this very dry round, and suddenly it'll be like, wait, there's 40 seconds on the clock, and suddenly this round is like a Reyna or Jets dream round. Totally,
yeah,
that's a good point. Yeah, I hadn't really thought about that. That's definitely a really really good point. That early round, it's like the opposite of what those comps wanted, but I think you'll end up in these late rounds that they're really happy with.
but to get to those late round scenario, you still have to have the baseline competency and setups to do the util trading, or they're going to have so much util that they can't just hit a site and they never have to take an actual 50-50. They're always super favored, right?
Yeah, that's
So it's
true.
like
Yeah.
it will definitely require a baseline competency, and I think it will require you to play an Astra, especially if you want to play Arena in your comp in a
Hmm.
util trading meta. You
Yeah.
will definitely not be able to do
Yeah.
that shit without an Astra.
Hmm.
So there's certainly a give and take, and I think obviously teams will all have their own take on it and their own play style, their own way of dealing with it. I don't think that we're just going to sit here and like foresee a month of hundreds of super talented players grinding the game and figuring shit out. But um, yeah, I do think that we'll see teams that have good structure, that can have good protocols on trading that util do very well.
Hmm.
And then you'll see the teams that are able to do that, but also have individual playmaking players, not just aim players, because in my opinion, it's like the difference between being a scorer in basketball versus a playmaking scorer in basketball, right?
Yeah.
If you can be a catch and shoot shooter, that's great. If you can create an opening
Hmm.
for yourself, and then shoot or force another defender to slide to you, and then you pass it to the open guy who is the catch and shoot shooter, right? Those are two entirely different levels of players, right? And I
Yeah.
think that this will enable those playmaking players to use their instincts, their mid-round reads
Hmm.
to get those really high impact kills when you need them once the utility is out and you're seeing where people are playing, what their tendencies are, right?
Yeah.
So I think it has the potential to really reward those playmaking kind of X factor players if it does end up being another really slow meta.
Yeah, that is a really good point. And I think, at the end of the day, I'm curious to see. I think she's definitely meta. I think she will be. It's at the pace, kind of a must pick, most likely. But I think from what you're saying, I think it's true. I think there's a great likelihood that there still will be a little bit of diversity in identity. It's not like, oh, she's good, so you have to play Raze and can't play Jett anymore. Like, I think,
Yeah.
yeah, there's still a trade off. You still have a more efficient utility based comp with Phoenix and Raze, and I think maybe a little more synergy with her abilities. But then with the other end of it, if you can be efficient with trading out her utility with Reyna Jett, you can kind of leverage around where there's not a lot of utility left as being the agents that are better in that situation. So,
Yeah.
at the end of the day, I think there will still be diversity there.
I wouldn't be surprised if we do see less Jett though, because I do think she is the best character we've seen so far at pushing ops off of angles.
Yeah,
Um,
that's true.
so there's a potential with the op, especially against her ult. The op is just a piece of shit.
Yeah.
Um, so I definitely think there's a potential for a dip in Jett play. I mean, Jett's not going to totally disappear. There's just absolutely no fucking way
Mhm.
that agent and that ult is just way too good.
Mhm.
Um, but Jett being a little less of a must pick and the op being probably the lowest level of must buy
Yeah.
outside of the Stinger Frenzy meta where no one could ever afford an op because you
Mhm.
never had a
Yeah.
single save round. Um, I think that's really interesting. And just her ult for retakes in general, I think also opens things up where it allows you to play really aggressively for map control on one extremity on one side of the map because you
That's
can
true.
be very confident in your
Mhm.
retake. So I think the rhythm around her ults and how teams play around her ults or read how the other team's going to play when they have their Astra ult, I think it's going to be one of the most important ults because it is such a free retake.
Yeah.
Um,
On
yeah,
certain maps, especially I would agree. Like I think Haven, for example, B and C
yes,
post plants are just ruined now because of her ult. So you have to play that very differently. I think the one thing I'll say about Jett is the one upside Jett has is her dash is she's got the only out to getting sucked. Even Raze's
yeah,
satchels don't work because it's a gravity well, so the gravity makes it so you can't jump. By the way, guys, if you haven't played Astra yet, you cannot jump out hookah anymore
yeah. You
because
can't
you
jump.
just get
Yep,
grabbed and you can't get out the window. But so that's one. The one plus about Jett is she can, I think, bait it better than anyone because she
sure.
actually can get out unpunished. But yeah, definitely her ult. I love it. I think it's kind of culminate the Astra conversation. I think with her ult, I think it's just quick ode to Riot. I think it's great design. I think I often talk about Killjoy ults, one of my favorite designs. When you're against a Killjoy ult, you consider a lot of different things. What way are they going to play this? What are they going to play for retake to get value out of the ult? Okay, now that I know that, I kind of want to push that area or plan to use an ult or ability to counter it. The defense team can think about that and kind of double back on you. You really engage with that heavily. There's a lot to think about for both teams when a Killjoy ult is in play, whichever team has it. And there's a lot of back and forth depending what you think the other team is thinking. When a Killjoy ult exists, it's a smart round, and you can use that brain that you have as a team or IGL or even coach, and really you can come out on top because the round got really nerdy because of that ult. And I do feel that way about her ult, Astra's ult. I feel that it's not just simple. It doesn't just help your team. You actually have to have plans around it to make it help you. It's to get value. You need to create situations and plans for it, and the other team can use it too. It can, there's
Yeah,
a lot of ults that you don't think it through. They can make a play with it, and I think it's one of those ults that make all the players on the server think differently, knowing it exists. in a way that is interactive, not in a way that's just like, oh, jet dags. Um,
Yeah,
and I applaud Riot. I think that is a. I think you're definitely right on retake. I think it looks great. I think other than that, it's awkward. I don't put it above something like Sova or Jet Alt, but I think it's good design and it's not a battle by any means, and it's
for sure.
going to be fun to watch. Yeah.
Um, I also think that the fact that abilities go through it allows for some
Hmm.
really interesting stuff. Um, Sky, for example, I think does a really good job at punishing the ult, being able to flash and ult through um through the wall can really help it be much less scary to have to pop through the wall.
Yeah.
Um and because I think that even so obviously people are going to have their kind of standard walls that they use for set plays and people are going to use very similar walls, same with just all the rest of the utility in the game. There's just good places to put things. People get used to it being there, right? People know where the omen blind's going to hit, people know where the recon's going to land, like, and can plan around that. It's going to be the same thing with the wall, but the wall still um it's just like a Viper wall in the sense that it cuts the side in half, and the angles you have to worry about are just totally different than the angles you worry about in any other situation.
Yeah.
Um, so I think that that will really reward people that come up with interesting twists on Astra ult or slightly different variations of Astra ult because
Hmm.
it totally changes the angles and the makeup of the site. So I think that it's an ult that does make you think differently and does make you change, but it's not, to me, we talk about like Sova ult, right? Where it's like, okay, you can Sova ult to like push for space, you can Sova play for your Sova ult on the post plant, you can Sinatra ult at the start of the round, but it's not much of a like we're gonna continually like advance how you execute with Sova ult,
Yeah.
right? It's like
Yeah.
there's a few set things you do and you do them and they're good and it's reliable. But with Astral, it really feels like that's something that can continue to be innovated. It feels
Yes,
like an ult
definitely.
that will keep having depth, that people will keep coming up with new
Hmm.
ways to use it and new counterplays for a long time, right? Which is just super fun as a coach, right?
Yeah. No, completely agree. It's like more of that design, please. I mean, I
Yeah.
think that Killjoy Alt, Recon Dart. There's abilities that have just evolved and evolved in playing against them, and that just the more the merrier, in my opinion. So I guess to kind of wrap up Astra, what are our thoughts? Are we happy with her? Are you happy with her?
Yes, I'm really happy with her. I'm hoping that Riot is willing to tune her down if her numbers look crazy.
Hmm.
Um, I know that in League of Legends, from I've been playing League since season one. They will release new characters, and if they're super OP, they're not that worried about it. They make everyone buy it, and then they nerf it. Um, so there's certainly potential for that. I just hope that she's not so oppressive and meta defining that it makes me I don't think she's getting played in Masters. So I think by the time actually I'm 99% sure at least she's not getting played in EU Masters because that was a discussion that was had in that EU coaches Discord that we
Hmm.
were
That's right.
discussing. Um so that's good because she has the potential to be really oppressive, and I wouldn't want her to show up and shake things up and like mess up the results for a lot of these teams that are putting in the work, right? And hopefully, by the time the next challengers comes around, she will have been adjusted down if the numbers show that she needs to be. It could be that we're not right about that, but as long as they're not willing to let her like run rampant for a long time, there's just no other complaint
Yeah.
that I really have. Just interesting character, uh has tons of depth. I think will continue to be innovated on as a character, even if she becomes kind of shitty and they like over nerf her, people will still love playing her and will still come up with new ways to use her abilities, new combos, all sorts of stuff. Yeah, 10 out of 10 in my opinion.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think she's Great design. Give her total 10 out of 10 in core design. I think she sounds like both of our money's on meta, and I'm happy with that. I think that's fine. The game needs a fresh look. I like how she'll probably make the gameplay. Very excited. I think her design's great. I think she will be good for the game. I like the Riot's unafraid to kind of go unconventional this early. I definitely, yeah, if she's so oppressive, I'm fine with her being the meta controller. I think if she's so oppressive that it feels unfun for everybody else to play against her, if you feel like you can't trade with her utility as any agent except her, like if it just feels miserable, then I hope they, that's a concern I have. I hope they tune it down. But generally, I'll give her, a 9 and my open welcoming arms. I'm looking forward to her. And on that note, I guess we're gonna take a quick little break here, and then we can jump back into, we're both coaches here, so I think we are gonna talk a little bit about coaching things and some things we have useful perspective on. And yeah.
Useful.
Yes, hopefully. All right, we will be back. What is up, guys? We are back. We had lots of amazing discussion during our break that you'll never get to know about, but we're here to kind of, we figured we're both coaches. Let's get into talking a little bit about the, what goes on a pro team and from a coaching POV, and give you guys some perspective on that. And with this whole conversation about Astra and kind of shifting the meta, there's a lot to be said about what does it mean to kind of be what's your role on a team? What does that really mean? How do you kind of shift and deal with this meta as a team? Interesting challenges, because Valorant's a very unique game. Very, very new challenges for somebody coming from Counter-Strike, and different challenges you have to adjust to coming from Overwatch or a game like League. And with Dream here being an Overwatch, having experience as an Overwatch coach, and myself not, seemed like a good point of conversation. So I guess what for as much as you're willing to share, comfortable to share, like what's kind of the initial start to an approach for you coaching a team of, okay, there's this new agent out, it might be really crazy good. What do you do? It's day one, kind of after a patch.
So the biggest thing is you want to have, at least in my opinion, my approach is we want to have a good idea of our strengths and weaknesses and our goals like around this new agent, because unless you're trying like a totally new comp, right? So like for example, we heavily shifted our icebox comp for VCT to be very like EU, Viper, Sage, Killjoy, like just super degenerate, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's its own thing. But when you're talking about integrating a new agent or testing a new agent, the most important thing, in my opinion, is all right, we're going to look at this agent and we're going to say, what are our like team goals? Like, how do we want our play to change based on this agent? And then individually with this utility, how are we going to play around it? Right. So, as we've talked about with Astra, Astra seems like she really encourages that map control, that utility trading. Right. So we need to say as a team, all right, guys, we're going to try and play really hard for map control, for efficient utility trading, for denying that info and trying to make those late round plays on T side. On CT side, we just want to control as much of the map as possible and make the T side fight for every inch they're going to get, so that if we end up having to retake, we have utility and they don't, or if they're trying to enter site without doing their due diligence, we're just going to kill them, right? So having that general playstyle thing, and then having the specifics for the Astra player, whoever that's going to be, and that depends on, I mean, because she's a controller, I think it makes a lot of sense to have your controller player start out on her, especially because of how common it is right now for IGLs to be on the controller role. She also has some similarities to Sentinel, so if you have a Sentinel IGL, you could try it. But she has an interest and easy fit in. If she was like kind of that flex role or getting played with an Omen, which is still possible, right? Then it's a little more of a conversation. But making sure that your team has that goal and your individual player that's going to be playing it, like, hey, we want you to focus on these combos. We want you to focus on controlling these areas of the map. So that way we can try that for a day, and then we can sit down and talk as a team and say, okay, did controlling map control work?
Hmm.
Okay. Did it feel good? Did it feel bad? When did it feel good? When did it feel bad? So we can start diagnosing, right? And then same thing with the individual utility use. When did it feel good? When did it feel bad? Against other Astras, did it feel like they were getting more value than us? When they didn't have an Astra, did it feel like we took advantage of the mismatch, or did it feel like they were able to take advantage of the mismatch, right? And
Yeah.
just have those really specific goals so that it's not just like we're testing and we're seeing what happens. We have
Hmm.
specific things to talk about and then iterate on, so you can test her for 4 or 5 days and get a pretty good feel on if this fits you as a team or not. And in this
Definitely.
case, maybe she's a little too strong so that even if it doesn't fit you, you might not
Don't
have
have a
a choice.
choice. Yes, that's always, yep.
But that we're not too sure on just yet.
Yeah, no, definitely. That's fair. I think, yeah. So I mean, I think I love your approach, and I think something I find important to underline about it, and definitely agree with, important for people to understand from the outside looking in, is this is, you're having conversations with a full team about the style of play you want. Did it work? What do you guys think about her? Were we getting value? Was this working? And was this working? It's not just, it's not football. There's not a coach and a quarterback and then a bunch of people listening. It's very much all five players are listening, talking, engaging, conversing, theory crafting, and it's very much a team effort. Um,
Yeah,
you need smart players kind of in every slot in this game is basically my point, because these processes rely on that.
yeah, it's got to be like super collaborative, right? And like, let's say we're talking about playing around bind, right? And we've talked about how getting like showers control is good for Astra, and we're like, or in general, and Astra is good at map control. So we're like, hey guys, we're gonna play bind. Let's just try on CT side to fight for showers control and get the orb every round and
Hmm.
see how that feels. And then you're like, oh, okay, that feels good. But then the other team on their CT side gets insane value because they suck slam long B every round and run it down long B. And if
Yeah.
we go hookah, they pinch us in hookah. And we're like, that was way harder to deal with than the
Yeah.
shower thing. Like, we got to change it up. We got to try and incorporate that instead. And that's not something the Astra player necessarily would have noticed because they're fighting for showers. So that's why it's important that other players that aren't the Astra player are still talking about, like, what is their Astra doing to me? How am I able to abuse their Astra player, right? So
Hmm.
you have to get everyone involved in those conversations when you're talking about a composition change, in my opinion.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think, talking big picture and understanding big picture, what's your gameplay and how are you trying to play the game, is definitely a good place to start. And I think it's interesting, you're definitely right. You don't want to go in with no plan and just like, hey, let's just see what happens, because it's just not like nothing good is going to happen if that's what you
Yeah,
do.
and for me, players' first impressions matter a lot.
Yeah.
If you play with a comp for a day and it just that day you just get railed, they're like, I never want to play that comp again. Fuck that. And
Yeah.
it's like, you have to have a flexible plan because you probably don't know everything you need to do just by looking at the numbers on paper and shit. But if you don't have a plan at all and that goes bad, you're gonna sour your players on the comp, and
Hmm.
it might take a lot of convincing to eventually move over to where you need to be.
Yeah, I think that is a really good point. You need to go into trying a comp with a good plan, because if if it is just a total train wreck, it's gonna be hard for players to want to keep trying it. It's gonna be like, well, that just sucked.
Yeah, we're
But then
wasting
it's
our
like, yeah,
time.
exactly. But then it's like, well, what if we just didn't get it? We didn't fundamentally apply it correctly. We didn't have the right setups to prove it. Like it was just a poor test of it. And it's balancing balancing just trialing by fire, with actually having it planned out enough that it's worthwhile and has a fair shake, is, from my experience, extremely hard. It's been,
Yeah,
I've only been a coach for, a month and a half. I've been a player for longer than that, so it's not totally foreign to me, but it's fun with Astra. She's by far the most frustrating. She's extremely complicated. She shakes up the game a lot. She's really weird, unintuitive, very, very different. And trying to try comps and her out in a way that is like, well, I want us to figure her out and then kind of make setups and plays. But if we just don't talk about anything, it just feels awful. It At the end of the day, more than anything, I emphasize kind of patience. Like you gotta have patience because it's like as a player, I forgot how awful it just sucks to lose, even if it's a scrim.
Yeah.
And it's like it sucks to play this game on a team level in a scrim where you're losing, things are going badly, and you just feel like you don't know what's happening, and it's just there is no structure, there's nothing you can call, there's no plan. Like it's hard, and it's really hard, and I'm glad I don't have to be in the server experiencing it, and I can just be the coach. But yeah, no, I definitely think having a plan, and I do think for following basic science and trying not to change too many variables at once is a good one, right? If you just change your whole comp
Yeah.
with Astra at the same time, you're not going to figure anything out. But on the flip side, hard to you know it's also like, well, what if your comp's game plan was very opposite to what Astra wants to do?
Yeah.
It's
You
like
can
endlessly
never
difficult.
actually isolate only one variable, but you can eliminate as many extras as possible,
Hmm.
right? But there will always be a bunch of confounding variables in a game this complicated, right?
Yeah.
There's nothing you can do about it, which is, I mean, that's just part of the game. That's fine, I think. But I think having that plan really does, in my experience, help with the very common frustration of trying to figure out a new meta or a new comp. Because being able to say, okay, this part of our plan didn't work, we're gonna change it,
Hmm.
makes them feel like, okay, we're not just gonna go in and get fucked again in this next scrim, or just feel like we're wasting our time, or we don't know what went wrong, right?
Yeah.
And that's why it's important, again, to have everyone be involved, because if I'm playing on the other site and my Astra just keeps like dying, taking fights, and then we're losing rounds, like, I want to know that the next time we scrim with Astra, that shit isn't going to happen again. What are we doing different so that doesn't happen again, right? That's a big thing for me, whether it's a new comp or just trying to improve in general, or like fixing one of our bad maps, whatever.
Hmm.
The the answer can never be just do X better.
Yeah.
That is useless as hell, right? You
Yeah.
have to have, like, what are we doing differently that will let us do this thing better, or do this thing differently, or whatever it is. So as long as you have a general take at the start, and then whenever things are going bad, you're talking about adjustments. And if the team really is just like, fuck this, we hate this hero,
Hmm.
sometimes the right thing to do is be like, all right, we're gonna at least take a few days off, play our normal comps, we'll play against it. Maybe playing against it some more will help us click on what we need to do, whatever. But really forcing the issue, I think, is a bad idea.
Yeah.
Even if she's like really hard meta, if it takes you a little longer to adapt and to embrace that, that's better than forcing it and everyone just being tilted for like an unspecified
Gotcha.
length of time. Like that is rough, in my opinion.
Yeah. So are you saying that if your team just can't really fit her, it's really not working, then instead of just continuously swimming upstream and getting so frustrated, kind of stick with your strengths as a team. And if she is going to be meta that to a degree where you don't have a choice, just let that kind of start to identify itself,
Yeah,
you know?
make that transition later. If you try
Gotcha.
and do the early testing and everyone's just like, yo, this blows. Like
Yeah.
this, I don't know how to play this. I don't know how to play around this. This is just frustrating. We're just losing. And just say, you know what? Our only path to victory isn't being the first best team to pick
Hmm.
up Astra.
That's
We
true.
can be late to the party and still be good at the
Okay.
hero.
Yeah.
That is very doable. So if it's not working for us right now, let's not force it. We're just going to get frustrated. We're just going to burn out. We're just going to erode some of the trust we have.
Hmm.
We'll come back to it if we need to.
That yeah.
And yeah, stuff like that. I think you just have to be very flexible, especially in a game like this where there is so much going on. So it has to be so collaborative, but also where so much of the history and the legacy of the players and coaches in the scene are coming from CS. CS is a very player driven game.
Yeah.
I come from Overwatch where, as the coach, I just get to tell everyone what to do and they have to listen to me and there
Hmm.
is no argument. I don't think that's how you should exercise your power as a coach, but that's the power the coaches in Overwatch have.
Yeah.
Um, that is not how this game works at all, and that's not a problem, right? But you just have to be aware of those things. And if your players are really adamant about something, that's okay. You can go with the players, and if we need to adjust later, it's easier for them to be convinced by their experiences than for you to try and
Yeah.
fight their experiences, you know?
Yes, that's true. That's a really good point. I think that is smart stuff. That I really like that idea that I can sit here as a coach and firmly believe this agent is just gonna be meta, and we should be the first best team with her because she's gonna be the best. And even if you think that's very likely, I see what you're saying. That if the way she plays really doesn't fit your team's blueprints and kind of the type of players you have, then you're not going to be doomed if she is meta and you have to play her. But if you're not set up to be an Astra team naturally, you're not going to end up being the team that breaks her and figures it out first anyway. So don't even
Yeah.
try. And ideally, if she really doesn't fit your team, you don't have to run her and you can keep doing what you're doing. And just trying to do that is probably trying to play your comp against her and make it viable. It makes sense. That's the best way to do that. And then you know what? Right. If after 2 weeks you're just losing scrims left and right, and it's like, hey, we don't have a choice, then you weren't going to
Let's
be the
buckle
team to
down and
crack
figure it
her
out.
down and break her open anyway. You could just take what you've learned from playing against her, and yeah, exactly. That's my initial thoughts are like, well, you lost 2 weeks of being the first best Astra team, but I think I think you raise a fair point that if your team's just, there are teams that play in a way naturally that really I think are going to click with Astra, and there's teams that aren't. And if you're not a team that naturally clicks with Astra, you weren't going to be the first to break her
You
open
aren't going to be
anyway,
you aren't
and
going to
that's
be
okay.
the team leading the way, right? And the other thing is you can also try utilizing her in a different way than other teams are utilizing her,
Yeah.
right? So let's say she does end up being the primary controller, right? Like play her with a Viper or
Mm-hmm.
some weird shit like that where you can don't have to use her stars as smokes very
Yeah.
often and you can much more often use them for the more aggressive utility, right? Stuff like that. Um where imagine having to play T side against an Astra and a Viper, where Viper has a permanent retake wall on one of the sites, and then Astra has all of her utility set up
Yeah.
at the other site. Like that's ass, right? So you can come up with ways to still play the hero, and then that way you can still get one of your players' reps on the hero. That way, if
Mm-hmm.
you do want to end up transitioning to the more standard version, that's there. But the biggest thing, because like I came into to coaching as like very much an analyst and someone that made like was doing casting and making analytical content and was very much about like the nitty gritty of the game and like
Mm-hmm.
who's playing it right. And
Yeah.
like the biggest thing that I've learned is like forcing what's best on paper is like it is so rare that the best thing on paper lines up with what is the best thing for your team, and you really need to try and find whatever middle ground like works for you.
Yeah.
But if people are getting like consistently frustrated and tilted and shit, like any aspiring like coaches out there, like even if your players want to do stupid ass shit, it's better for your players to do stupid ass shit untilted and do it together than just have like some people that are down for it and some
Mm-hmm.
people that like hate it, and it just creates discord within the team. It's just an issue, bro. And
Yeah.
that sometimes you just got to be like, we just got to play what we're gonna play and sink or
Mm-hmm.
swim, you know?
Yeah. No, I think that is extremely valuable to understand for and fun to understand for anyone in any space of Valorant, whether you're just a spectator, a fan, coach, player, a manager, an org. I think some people say this game is very creative. You can play whatever comp, and vision you have. And I think I know I see people sometimes online quick to disagree to that. And if you think about this game on paper, it's easy to be quick to disagree with that. And I understand what you're saying. from making analytical content, thinking about the game. It's fun to do that. I love nerdy stuff like poker and Magic the Gathering, and like that's all about like just like what's better and let's figure it out and then just do it. But you know, and I've made tier lists on my YouTube channel. But the reality is, what is on paper the best. What the comps we ran on Ghost in the last month of tournaments are not. If you just told me you're gonna just magically coach a team of just
Perfect
ambiguous
robot.
players, like it's not the comp I would have thought of. But
Yeah.
I firmly believe we ran in this last set of challenger qualifiers. I believe we ran the best comps that were the best for our team, and it's for me. I might be wrong. Maybe there's other games similar, but for me, it's the first game that really, you said middle ground, and I think those are the key words. Valorant emphasizes a middle ground in a really amazing way. It makes it really fun to coach that other games don't, because in Counter-Strike there isn't really agents and metas. There's just 5 Counter-Strike players and they all have the same grenades, and you kind of just play to what your players
Yeah, sometimes
styles
a
are.
Krieg pops up for a little while,
Yeah, exactly. But
It's teamed up.
if you've got a really good lurker player, you have a lurker every round. If you don't, you don't. It's kind of whatever works with your players, and to a degree. And for I think for Overwatch and League, it is more just how do I I'm thinking when you watch a Counter-Strike player, you can see you could guess if I said you're watching the POV of an Astralis player and you're somebody who watches a lot of Counter-Strike or plays a lot. I think you could have a reasonable guess if you watched a couple rounds of which player you're watching without knowing their
Yeah.
name, because you can see the decisions they're making, the style of play, even their movement, the way they aim and shoot and take fights. Really, their personality shows up, and you could feel free to call me out on it because I'm much more layman with Overwatch than you, but I do think with games like Overwatch and League, the core gameplay is not so skill based of 100 HP in a rifle and everyone has the same movement, that you can just tell. Like it's more like that's a tracer player, that's a mid laner. I'm sure there's slight differences, but do you think it's fair to say?
I think it depends on the hero. I think some
Yeah,
heroes, like, you can definitely tell, like Tracer, I would say,
sure.
because she has so many different, like, decisions she can make and things she can do.
Hmm.
It's like pretty, like, you can definitely tell usually the difference between Tracer players, but there's the overwhelming majority of characters don't have that deep and divergent of a decision tree the
Yes.
way
Yeah.
Tracer does, right? She's definitely one of those characters where it's less of a thing. But I think I think it does go back to what we were saying before, where Valorant does have, regardless of what agent you're playing, a very core gameplay like idea. And like
Yeah.
this is what the majority of the
Hmm.
game is and what it all revolves around. Um, and those things stand out way more than players' utility usage, right?
Yeah.
You can look at
Totally.
things like players that have super sick like jet ults, or super sick raise movement,
Hmm.
or you know, do really dumb like aggro omen TPs. Like there's definitely utility that will point you to play styles and certain players, right?
Definitely.
But the most identifiable thing is their movement and their aim and their
Hmm.
general gameplay patterns, right?
Yeah.
And I think that that is more what you should play to when you talk about playing to strength
Hmm.
than than an agent because of their utility. So what I
Yeah.
mean by that is if you like whatever the obvious example everyone points to for stuff like this is like Hiko on Sova
Yeah.
being like a giant fucking baiter, right? And he calls himself a giant fucking baiter. That's fine. You can do
Hmm.
that. But like you don't want like him playing that way on any other agent,
Yeah.
right? So because that is his natural playstyle, that agent is a really good fit for him. And you want your team playstyle. Everyone on the team needs to be aware that like
Yes.
Hiko's not running in front of you, bro.
Hmm.
Like that's just not going to happen, and that's okay as long as we all understand that and we're comfortable playing to
Yeah.
their strength, right? Whereas you've got someone like a BCJ who isn't like an entry on Sova or anything, but he's definitely not baiting, and he's willing to take those raw 1v1s in the mid round, right? And
Yeah.
just go for big plays. And you don't want him to be the I'm the perfectly efficient Sova, always having dart for their entry or for their retake and always getting perfect info and like staying alive so I can get
Hmm.
3 darts in a round. You want to let him off the leash a little bit, let him go
Yeah.
make those plays, right?
Yeah.
And that's the big thing to me is you want to get those the based on how they want to play that core gameplay experience. That's how you figure out what agent should work for them,
Yes.
and where you can fit them to enable that play style, and then have your whole team kind of work around each other in that way, right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I do think, we're talking about core gameplay at the, end of the day, I talk on any content so much about utility and management of it and strategies and ults and blah, 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 because when both teams are playing great, that's what decides who wins. But the reality, if you watch pro games, is there's teams that win because they were all hitting shots, or one player had a really good game and the others, one guy had a really bad game, or they're all kind of having a bad day. And there's lots that goes into that we don't have to get into about, the atmosphere, are they sleeping well, is there good performance psychology going on, whatever. But we talk about this stuff that's the deciders in a perfect game, which is strategy. But at the end of the day, there are enormous amount of professional Valorant games that end a certain way because a certain player or a certain team on average was having a better day with their aim, even in this very strategically deep game. And I think it's not studied yet because there's no university that's getting into studying tactical FPS and how
Sure.
confidence affects your aim and so on in it. I don't think, but I don't think anyone who's played would disagree that your confidence and comfort play a significant role in your winning a 50-50 and hitting good shots and making good plays. You do have natural styles as a player, and being in that flow state, as people call it, has to do with playing in that natural style. My main point being we're talking about that middle ground between like what's ideal and on paper meta and what do players have in comfort. And my point is that comfort goes a very long way in this game. Like
Yeah.
if I remember the first team Code 7, we had a player who liked Omen and hated Brim, and Brim was just like objectively way better. But they played so much more comfortably, hit more shots, talked more, were happier on Omen, and it was just without a question the better choice. And I think that's, it's really important for coaches to understand, for players to understand, for spectators, for armchair analysts on Reddit thinking about why are they trying this comp or doing this. I cannot emphasize enough that a player being comfortable means they're confident, and a player that's confident is going to have way more fragging power than a player who's uncomfortable and inconfident. And I that will always come before the agent, in my opinion. Although it gets to a point where maybe an agent is so strong that you need to learn to be comfortable and confident on them. But I think short
Yeah.
term, you have a tournament the next day. It's always comfort. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think I definitely think that you don't want to just uh only play in the comfort zone just because, just like in any area of life, if you just only stick to your comfort zone, you'll never find out that maybe this other thing, like once you put the time in, like really
Yeah.
resonates with you. But if you are putting the time in and that it just doesn't feel good and it's not working, don't sunk cost fallacy it and be like, well, let's just keep going.
Totally.
Just
Yeah.
cut your losses and keep moving. You know what I mean? I think that's a big part of it. And one thing that I really liked, so Yassine from Guild said this in an interview during First Strike, and someone asked him, it was like after a win, and one of the hosts was asking him about like EU versus NA or something. And
Mm.
he was like, NA thinks they're like ahead on the meta, and I don't know if they are. Maybe they are, maybe they're not. But it doesn't matter because they're gonna come into hookah, and I'm gonna kill 3.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that's just how it is sometimes. You
Yeah.
can have the read, you can have the right util, but if somebody just hits the shots, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So there is a lot of balancing there, and it does require the players for you to be on a top team and consistently be at the top. If you're having a bad game, to a certain extent, you can rely on good utility usage, good comms, smart rotations. But if you want to beat the best teams, they're all gonna have good comms and good utility
Mm-hmm.
usage, good rotations, all that stuff. And the difference largely does come down to, okay, a little bit of play style matchups. There's a little bit of rock, paper, scissors, just because different play styles are so prevalent, different comps are so prevalent. But bigger than anything else, when it comes down to those 3 or 4 rounds a half, where there's a really important 2v2, a really important 3v3, or just a really big lurk, and it's that one gunfight
Mm-hmm.
that and just a handful of those can really swing or dictate an entire half.
Yeah.
And then that half can then dictate an entire series.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um, so it really is important also to talk with your players about that, where it's like, hey, look, sometimes you're gonna do everything right and still lose, and
Mm-hmm.
we just gotta go next. Like
Yeah.
that's okay, that's gonna happen. And you don't need to look at that and say that means I fucked up, right? And also, there are going to be times where you do a bunch of things wrong and the other team does everything right, and you just hit some shots and you're just like, oh, this was a great play. And it's like, really? This was
Yeah.
a dumbass
Yeah.
play, but you just bailed yourself out with some sick shots. So,
Totally.
credit for the 6 shots. That was awesome. But let's not be results oriented with our analysis,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think especially in analyzing, comps, I think it's important to understand by the end of, okay, by the end of the Reykjavik Iceland tournament that's in June, there's going to be the best team at that who won that, and you can look at their comp and go, well, they won, so that's the best comp, right? But they might just be, well, first of all, they could have just had a good day, or it could have been a really close game that came down to a few clutches, or the other team making some more mistakes. But they might just be the best team of. They're just
Yeah.
maybe the coach and analyst staff is just like really stellar, or like there's just great infrastructure. Maybe it's a mix of that, or and the players, or maybe the players are just superstars, just like they're just really good players who play really well together, and that is the comp that fits them. So they won with it because they're the best team and they played their best comp, and a different team played their best comp, which might on paper actually be a better comp, but they're a worse team. And at the end of the day,
Yeah.
that's it's definitely a middle ground between that and like a meta. And I don't think it will always be one way in Valorant. If it is, the Valorant devs will be the greatest game developers in the history of video games.
Ever of all time.
I think what will probably happen is it will ebb and flow. There will be periods where it's really flexible and other periods where it's like this agent and this is the way to play, and that's the way it is. And I hope they strive for one or the other and keep it pretty consistent. But I think that's important to think about. And kind of on that note, we talk about there's flex players and there's players who have really big strengths. Hiko's a baiter. Hiko is a he said he's a baiter, and he was a baiter in Counter-Strike. He's a baiter more than he's a Sova player. He is a baiter, and Sova's really good for baiters. So put Hiko on Sova. But I think in many games, including Counter-Strike, you have these superstar players. Maybe it's an insane lurker or an insane opper or an insane entry, but they are your star, and you build your team around that game plan, and then you flex players that support it. But I do think that what's really interesting in Valorant is I think it's possible that having a flex player who performs really well in terms of aim duels, gunfights, just their fragging power, while being a flex player, is almost the star of this game. And I think that's why people talk about players like succ so much, because it's like that guy performs. He's not like the flex support who's kind of supporting the big. He's like the big fragger, or one of the big fraggers on that team, and is very clearly flexible and comfortable, not just in agents, but in role. He can be the support, he can be the entry. And I think Sinatra, probably not to the same degree, but, seems to achieve the same strength. That appears to be a pretty flexible player and very confident and comfortable regardless of his position or agent. And I think that's why you have such a good team, because you have these players that perform mechanically at a very high level and are very flexible and comfortable at the same time. And so to kind of wrap up this thought, sorry, it's a long one, but in a game where that meta might ebb and flow, maybe, one meta is double initiator, the next is triple duelist. Having those players who can flex and still play well, you're just not as stuck or as stiff as a team. You avoid the issues of having to be like, oh, that might be really meta, but we have to try to do it our way. I mean, your way is just whatever is best on paper. And
Yeah,
it's
and you see that a little bit with how Sentinels talked about how they felt that they weren't adapting well to LG and Immortals, contact play style, which I think was definitely overemphasized. I don't think that doing like a 4-1 and having your one be a Reyna who like waits 40 seconds in the round to lurk up site and gets a kill. That's not a contact play, motherfucker. That's just a lurk. And
yeah,
we go back to the site.
yeah,
So there were definitely some examples that were being floated where people were complaining about that to a certain extent. But you see that they adapted and they're like, we're gonna change our play style, we're gonna change our agents up a little bit and we're going to play differently to deal with this. And they have the
yeah.
ability to do that as Sentinels. But one thing that I think is really important to talk about is that it's very, very hard to achieve that with only one of those flexible players.
Yeah,
So the
totally.
thing that enables Six so much is that Sinatra also has role flexibility,
Mm-hmm.
and to a lesser extent, Shazam as well.
Yeah,
Um, and
yeah.
their ability to all make small swaps while Stick makes the bigger swaps around is what allows them to still be cohesive.
Mm-hmm.
If Stick was with four very rigid players, his flexibility wouldn't mean that much
Yeah.
because it's only one thing that can change, right? But because they have one extremely flexible players, or one extremely flexible player, sorry, and then two pretty flexible players, that's what really allows them to take advantage of those strengths
Yeah.
that Sick gives them. And it's also really obvious from seeing Sick play that he understands like composition win conditions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like what is our composition good at, but what is our composition good at in relation to what the other comp is trying to do?
Yeah.
Are they
Yeah.
playing a comp that plays like very heavy for like retakes? Are they playing a comp that's very much about mid control and denying info and then like breaking ankles and like
Right.
going somewhere on the map? Whatever. He's very good at understanding what his win con is, what the enemy team's win con is, and just not taking his foot off of the gas as far as always pressing towards a win condition, not just doing things because he thinks he can win a duel, right? Like a
Yeah.
lot of players will do things where it's like, okay, I think I can punish this tendency to win a duel. Sick is like, I'm going to punish this tendency that lets me win a duel in the right area of the map to
Totally.
take all the space and win
Yeah.
the round.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. No, I think having smart players kind of means they're flexible because they're not just doing what's intuitive to them. They are doing what they understand needs to be done to win. And I think
Yeah.
they're good at understanding that. And I definitely, yeah, I think a lot of their secret sauce is the flexibility across players and the intelligence that either is what's creating that flexibility or working with it. And that's a very good point. I think, yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, I think you need at least 1 to 2 players who are very flexible in their play style. I think usually smart players enable that because they're just doing what makes sense to win instead of like a natural intuition of I want to take this fight or something. And I do think that you need way more than 1 to 2 players in terms of flexibility of agents, right? Because
Yep.
it's happened right now. If Astra's meta, Omen was a very simple gun out agent who
Yes.
was actually very flexible in like the positions he could play, but he could lurk. He was like a playmaker kind of agent.
He could anchor,
He could
on
anchor.
sites that have good one ways, especially.
Right. So if you have a terrible rotator player, but they're a really good anchor player, and they're a good lurker and playmaker, and they like simple agents, they're not super talkative, they could play Omen great. But like that description of that player, like big anchor, like super kind of not that talkative, like simple gun out, that's not an Astra player. And so I cannot emphasize enough, if anyone is ends up listening to this who's trying to come up as a player, like first of all, number one gripe on LFT tweets when you go, I play Cypher and Jet and Brim. Okay, you're either the greatest player in the world because you actually do really well on all those things and you're just headed straight for the top, buddy, or you're not thinking this through because how are you? What do I want my Jet to do? What do I want my Cypher to do? And what do I want my Brim to do? Those are 3 very, very different players. Not just agent kits, but stylistically, those are maybe that's not quite the right word, but in terms of personality, those are different roles on a team. I also don't think people have to go, I play Sova, Sky, and Breach, because I think that's a good starting point. I think for a tier 2 team that's just trying to mix and match, maybe there's more roster changes. It makes sense to play within your role. Okay. But, Sova is much less, he's a starkly different, not starkly, but quite different role from Breach. I think if you go, I play Sova, Omen, Cypher, that initially sounds like my first example. It looks weird, but actually it makes quite a bit of sense. Those are 3 agents that end up last man standing a lot. They're quite baity. They need to value their life a lot, and they're pretty supportive, but not extremely active and vocal. So, I think for most players, figure out what kind of player you naturally are and play the agents that reward that and sprinkle some flexibility on it. I think that's kind of a good blueprint. I think if you are a very smart and flexible player, maybe talent's not the right word, but I do think that is a rare thing to be a player who can be a big baiter, a big lurker, a totally aggressive entry, and look comfortable enough to perform at a professional level in all those things. If you see that in yourself, embrace that. You are going to be a catch. You're going to be like sick one day, and those players are needles in a haystack and really important in Valorant. But I think it's fair to say for players, I think it is fair to say that that's not me. Like, I'm a really intuitive player, or I'm really emotional. I need to play my way and
feel it out.
And if that's the case, play the agents that reward that. Don't go on the Riot website and go controller, initiator, sentinel, because most teams will know the 5 players' feelings of how they want to play and swap agents around within a meta to make that work. And hopefully they have really flexible, those needle in a haystack players to kind of make that work. I think that's kind of, yeah.
I mean, honestly, if you can come to me as a player and you can tell me what kind of player you are, I already like you. I'm already like, you are aware of a lot of shit that's going on in the server, a lot of shit that's going on strategy-wise, and you understand how you should fit into that. If you've got that, I'm already taking you serious, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's
Totally.
a big deal. So I like players that are aware of that, not just from a how do I like to play? Am I a cerebral player? Am I a feel player? Am I the entry? Am I the second man in? Am I the baiter? Whatever. Where do I feel comfortable? That's really important. But also where you fall as your emotional role in the team.
Yeah.
Like, am I the leader? Am I the rally the troops? Am I the keep us even keel? Like, what can I bring to the team in that way? Because no one does all of those things.
Yeah.
So people need to stop thinking, yes, I'm all of those things. I can do
you want
everything.
the job, but
if I just grind hard enough, because esports grind culture, right? If I just grind hard enough, I can do anything. I can overcome any weakness our team has. And it's like, you sound like like the main character in a shonen, like like totally delusional 12-year-old
pushes up glasses,
like come
conquer
on,
the
guys.
world.
Just be realistic here, and it'll make everything way easier. The other thing I'll say is that when it comes to wanting to find a way to cultivate that understanding of win conditions and that flexibility and stuff, one thing that I think is really good right now, because the map pool is small, is like having a permaban map, right? So doing something like saying, all right, we're gonna permaban Icebox because the strats on that map are diverging wildly right now. We have very different styles of play that are coming up on that map. We do not want to take all the time to prep for multiple, like, very different styles of play. We're just going to cut that out, say, fuck Icebox. And then on Ascent, we're going to play a different comp than we usually play. Okay. And like, let's say, so this is an example. As a team, we in the past have historically not been very good at being aggressive on CT side. Okay. And making it to where, like, obviously we've talked about being reactive in this game, like being good at being reactive is really important. Well, you also need to be able to test the other team and poke and prod them and be like, are they good at being reactive?
Yeah.
Let's see how well they react to these things. Keep them honest, right?
Hmm.
We're not really good at switching up the pace and deciding we're going to throw a curveball at them and see how they respond, and then that'll tell us what to do in the future rounds, right?
Yeah.
So what you can do there is say, hey, let's go to a map like Ascent where you can play aggressive in A main, you can play aggressive in B main, you can play aggressive in mid. You have multiple different CT aggression options that are all good. And
Hmm.
we're going to play a comp that lets us play really aggro on CT side. And we're just going to, on Ascent, we're just going to play a different style. If people want to play different roles, we'll give them an opportunity on this map to switch roles as long as they can give us a reasonable take on why they want to switch.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they'll probably just be playing a different hero in the same role. But eliminate one map from the pool entirely, and then have another map where you're like, this is suited towards a play style we're not that good at yet. So we're going to take this map and play a comp like that and learn that play style. Even if
Hmm.
it doesn't end up being in our wheelhouse, it will greatly expand everyone's understanding of the game.
Yeah.
So I
Absolutely.
think doing stuff like that is really, really helpful for like growing teams or teams with a lot of inexperienced players that have a lot of talent,
Yes.
but they just need to get more reps.
Right. Yep.
So
Yep. No, that is a really good point, and I think reps expand your minds, expand your agent pool, expand, diversify, be flexible, and know what you do best. And it's such a complicated middle ground to strike, and you can never be perfect at it. And the whole time you're trying to be perfect at hitting this middle ground between flexibility and playing to the game's strengths, but also playing to kind of your strengths. The game is changing too, and shifting what the strengths are, and shifting how much stronger than they are than the other options. And it I think that it's really difficult, and it takes a lot of thought, and clearly you are very brilliant in your perspective and ideas on it. um I think that's going to be a lot of what being a winning Valorant team
yeah,
consistently throughout a long period of time is going to be about, is this striking this balance between your strengths and your identity, but also growing and adapting and being flexible. And like, it's a fun question because it is ever changing. I think about it all the time, and I never have an answer that stays the same on it.
there will
Yeah.
never be an answer. That's what makes it so fun and
Yeah.
so challenging,
Yes.
because not only is there never an answer, but you find out what works for you specifically in one meta, but
Mm-hmm.
you like, it takes a little while to strike that balance, and then you've maybe got like 2 months before the
Yeah.
meta changes and you got
Yeah.
to find another new balance again,
Yeah.
man. So it's always fun, it's always challenging, but as long as you can create that collaborative atmosphere within the team where everyone is learns how to communicate what they're feeling. Because, bro, every single player that's good at this game, when they're in a server and something feels bad, they know it feels, they're like, this feels like shit. But
Mm-hmm.
not everyone is good at explaining what feels bad, or like when it gets from like difficult to like
Yeah.
unmanageable. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So as long as you create that environment where everyone feels like their takes and their positions matter, and they get practice at learning to communicate those things, if you can create that, then that is how you become the closest to being a meta proof team,
Mm-hmm.
in my opinion. It's not about everyone being able to play every single character. I don't think that is a reasonable, or even if it was doable, a super good
Yeah.
solution anyways. That you want those unique voices with an actual perspective,
Mm-hmm.
and then you can take advantage of all of those together, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yep. No, and it's always a balancing act of, yeah, if you try every agent and every comp all the time, you're inevitably, those practice days were not efficiently improving certain fundamentals or chemistry. I can't tell my players to work really hard on their comms and just focus, hey, this game, focus super hard on your retakes, if it's the same game where I'm like, good luck, you're trying a new comp today. And
Yeah.
it's the I feel very lucky to be starting a coaching career in this game, and to be coaching this game, because there's never enough time or energy in a day or a year to do everything, and it's super frustrating and super fun. Like I think it speaks to the depth of the game in a way that I think we're 11 months into Valorant's existence as a playable game for most. I think for most people that's not enough time if you're not a pro player coach to see this yet. So I'm glad that we're speaking on it, because I mean, I think it's beautiful. I think it's a beautiful thing about the game. It's a really deep game. Yeah. And that's I'm out of steam. That's it for me. On that, I think that's a good note to kind of end on. It's a very beautiful, very deep game. It's Dream and I have been talking for over 2 hours now, and I feel this creeping anxiety of feeling like we both have there's so much more we could have talked about, and there's so many things this could have gone in, but also it was so much and 2 hours, and like I don't think I could solve my anxiety in that. I think that is the nature of this incredible game.
It's another impossible balance to find, man. Yep. That's just what Valorant
gotta learn to live with it, I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
But regardless of that, I think it was all very, very interesting and useful, and it means there's plenty more. We could just do an episode tomorrow and the next day. There'd be more and more. This was not difficult. It was fun, and I think hopefully very interesting and useful for people. I feel there's not a lot of podcasts getting really kind of deep on this stuff yet. I think I think we did it. I hope other people feel we accomplished that. I think our perspective enabled it. Any final words from the topics on you, Dream, or just if you have any shout outs or anything?
For sure. I mean, just everything we've talked about, from Astra coming into the game to just general coaching approaches based on like game design and kind of the facts of Valorant, just make me super excited for the future of the game. I love where it is now. I think it's just going to keep getting better. Obviously, there will be some bumps in the road and some hiccups, some weird metas, but overall, I am just really happy to be working in this game. I see a very bright future for this game and for the competitive scene as a whole. So I hope that everyone that is in the scene now and working hard early gets rewarded because of what everyone's building and what I think this is building towards, right? And just like kind of sign off stuff. Thank you very much for having me on. This was super fun. I really liked just talking shop, kind of nerding out about all this stuff. And also just big thanks to all the people that are on Cloud9 White with me, the players, as well as Moon and Nuki. I would not be able to have these conversations so in depth without grinding out so many hours with them, because I did come into the game late compared to a lot of people. So yeah, without them, I wouldn't have the level of understanding that I do. And I'm so glad that I do, because I just really love this game and I love talking about it. So yeah.
Likewise to many of the things you said about this game, working in it. Thank you for coming on, Dream. I think, everybody should applaud, if you came into this game in October and you are saying the things you're saying here, you've taken no time to go from playing catch up to clearly at the forefront pioneering these ideas. Go follow Dream at Dream_Val. I'm sure I will edit it into this screen anyway if you are watching on video. And definitely follow and root for Cloud9 White. I love watching the team play. Clearly you have really amazing players on that team. And obviously a very good staff that the impact shows. You guys have grown a lot and had some pretty awesome games. And this was very fun. And I would love to hear everybody's feedback on it, and kind of hope everyone enjoyed it. We will, I'll be doing more of these, kind of bringing different people on. And I'm sure Dream will hopefully come back and hang out and talk as well.
Anytime, man.
All right. Thank you, and take it easy, guys. See ya.